Good evening. Welcome to the Township of Whitewater Region Regular Council meeting for Wednesday, March 16th, 2022 at 4:46 p.m. As we gather, we would like to acknowledge on behalf of Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Now please stand for the prayer. Almighty God, we give thanks for the great blessings which have been bestowed on Canada and its citizens, including the gifts of freedom, opportunity, and peace that we enjoy. Guide us in our deliberations as Township Councillors and strengthen us in our awareness of our duties and responsibilities. Grant us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to preserve the blessings of this country for the benefit of all and to make good laws and wise decisions. Amen. Now I will ask the Council present this evening if there's any disclosure of interest. Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you. And we'll go to 4.1, Zoning Bylaw Amendment.
Oh, I did do a script for you and I forgot it.
Okay. Well, you can read my part. What's that?
Ivan has to do his research.
Okay. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region approve the amendment for the zoning category of the property described as part of lots 1 and 2, Westmeath Concession, North Front D, Collunge Lake Trail. Motion and seconder, please.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, no, sorry.
Motion and seconder, please. Reeve Rigier and Councillor McLaughlin. Thank you. And this goes to Ivan.
Yeah, thanks so much. So this is a meeting that's a statutory public meeting pursuant to the Planning Act. So I'll just read a quick planner statement. So if any person or public body does not make an oral submission at the public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of Whitewater Region before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council to the Ontario Lands Tribunal. The person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the tribunal unless in the opinion of the tribunal there are reasonable grounds to do so. Under Section 3411 of the Planning Act, if council decides to refuse an application or refuses or neglects to make a decision on an application within 120 days, the applicant or the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing may appeal to the tribunal by filing an appeal with the clerk of the municipality. Section 3419 of the Planning Act states that not later than 20 days after giving of notice of passing of the bylaw, the applicant or any person or public body who made oral submissions at the public meeting or made written submissions to council before the bylaw was passed may appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal by filing an appeal with the clerk of the municipality. Thank you.
Okay. Ivan, would you give us a description, please?
So just present the application, correct? Thanks.
Please.
Yeah, so the first application submitted by Paul Gervais on behalf of himself and Yves Francoeur. It pertains to a property that has frontage on Collunge Lake Trail, described as part of lots 1 and 2, Westmeath Concession, North Front D. Paul and Yves, they filed three severance applications, 2 of them to create residential waterfront properties, and the third severance to create what will become a new private road. One of the conditions of approval was a requirement to rezone the properties, to change a portion of the property from an aggregate zoning to a waterfront zoning, a waterfront vicinity zone, and then the other one to reduce a minimum separation distance from 150 meters down to 50 meters. So the applicant, to support this zoning application and his severance application, filed an aggregate impact assessment. It was prepared by JP2G Consultants, and it dates back to October 2021. The findings of that report indicate that the resource on the subject land is classified as a tertiary significance, so a lesser significance than a first or second class aggregate. It's unlikely to support large-scale aggregate resources development. It's quite distant from markets, and there's an abundance of primary and secondary sources of aggregate in the township and throughout Renfrew County. So they are supportive of that change through the aggregate impact assessment. So this is a report, a zoning amendment that will fulfill a condition of the 3 severance applications. Certainly the development currently exists. There's already a dwelling on one property and a seasonal dwelling on another. So certainly there won't be some substantial development other than the construction of the private road. So staff are supportive of this. The character will generally remain the same with the waterfront and rural character for the lots. And we're looking for council's consideration of this application. Thanks.
Okay, there's nobody in attendance on this on Zoom, so if any councillors have any questions? Seeing none? Thank you. Oh, I did have a question. Sorry, Ivan, you mentioned at one point it was 2 lots, then you said 3 lots. Is there 3 lots involved here?
So there's two residential lots, and the third severance application was to create the private road. So it's actually going to be surveyed to meet the minimum standards of the municipal policy for a private road standard. So 2 new lots and a private road.
And will it be coming off the present road at that location?
So the private road will project off of Coulonge Lake Trail.
Right.
So it'll project off of it, and it'll have a new name once it's constructed and the like.
Okay, and then you changed the setback from down to 50? What was the original setback?
So the minimum setback between a dwelling and an aggregate zoning is 150 meters. So it'll be reduced down to 50 meters.
Is that active aggregate, do we know?
This is a reserved aggregate. So it's currently in an extractive industrial reserve zone. So it's kind of in a reserve designation.
And that's not going to change, that's going to stay there?
The one on the adjacent land will stay, yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I had, thanks.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
You have the motion, but you can say it again, and we have a mover and a second, so
Okay.
there's no,
All right, we have a mover and a seconder, so if there's nothing else, we'll call for a vote. All in favor? Carried, thank you. The next is 4.2, zoning bylaw amendment, part lot 16, Westmeath Concession 7 EML. Recommendation of the Council of Township of Whitewater Region approve an amendment to the zoning category of the property described as part lot 16, Westmeath Concession 7 EML, Lookout Road. Motion and seconder, please. Councillor Jackson and Councillor McLaughlin, thank you. And this goes to Ivan, please.
Yeah, thanks. So the present application submitted by Barry Newenhouse. Barry filed 2 severance applications, files D10, 156, and 157, each of which to create 2 new residential properties back in December 2021, and they were supported and approved by the Committee of Adjustment. One of the required conditions was, again here, a zoning amendment to rezone the property from extractive industrial reserve zone to the rural exception 43 zone. Essentially removing it from an extractive industrial reserve zone. So these 2 properties are kind of on a periphery of the reserve, so it's not going to have a significant impact to the fulsome aggregate extraction or the reserved extraction for that property. In this case, the minimum reduction in the separation distance is from 150 meters down to 3 meters, so that will provide for the development, the proposed single units on each of those lots. This application is supported by a scoped environmental impact study and a plan justification report by JP2G. So the properties in question are also within an area of natural and scientific interest, so an ANSI. It's called the Pretty Hill Area ANSI, and that's a representation of the former Champlain Sea. So a lot of features from the former Champlain Sea there. So essentially, the development of these lots with single-family units rather than the extraction of the aggregate will provide for a lesser impact to that ANSI, that area of natural and scientific interest. So staff are supportive of this, and we're supportive of the severances as well, and we're just looking for council's consideration. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, and I understand there's no one present? Correct, so does council have any questions? Seeing none, call for a vote, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Thanks, Ivan. Now we move on to 4.3, flood risk assessment. Presentation from Andrea Bishop and Stephen Arends, JP2G.
and I believe they're on,
Okay, I see them up there. Welcome, folks.
Yeah, so we have Andrea Bishop and Stephen Arends from JP2G to present tonight the flood risk assessment study, final report, which you remember back in July of 2021, the council approved to JP2G for the study with the background was completed in December, and tonight they're here to present the final report. And I'll turn over to Stephen or Andrea.
Yeah, hi. I think Andrea is going to lead the presentation with presenting it, and we'll work through it that way. So maybe you could start, Andrea, and go with it a little bit. Do we have the ability to share a screen, actually? I didn't ask that.
I can. The host disabled the screen sharing, so would be able to change that so I can share, or do you guys have the presentation available?
They're working on it.
Okay.
Should be good now. Can you try it and see?
Yeah.
Good, we can see it.
Good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you. So my name is Andrea Bishop, and I'm a civil engineer with JP2G Consultants. So Stephen Arends is here with me, and he's a civil engineer and project manager as well. So we completed this flood risk assessment study. So JP2G has completed a flood risk assessment study for an area south of Westmeath along the Ottawa River. The study encompasses many grandfathered properties situated in the floodway or flood fringe, as well as the Westmeath Provincial Park. This area seasonally floods with the spring freshet and represents a significant and recurring flood risk. The goal of the flood risk assessment study was to prepare an action plan with flood mitigation solutions. So we collected background information from residents through phone calls, emails, and one-on-one interviews on site. Seasonally, the water level rises, but typically there's no damage to the infrastructure. In 2017, sandbags were used as a flood mitigation strategy, although some of the lower lying structures and accessory buildings flooded and required repair. Based on the information collected from homeowners, no mitigation measures were successful in the 2019 flood. There were extensive damages to most properties along Greatview Trail, Edgewater Trail, and Sunset Trail, some of which were unrecoverable. And in response to these flood events, some residents and cottage owners have installed retaining walls or rock walls, or have raised their structure onto cinder blocks or another foundation. Several property owners sought funding in order to make repairs, but only permanent residents could qualify for the Disaster Recovery Assistance for Ontarians program, and therefore very few actually received funding. So I'll pass it over to Stephen now to talk about the proposed flood control measures.
Thanks, Andrea. So what we put on here is we've got a map that identifies, excuse me, how high the water got to. So in here is the 112.5. That's an important elevation. In the 1980s, there was a floodplain mapping done. I guess done by the federal government, and it created these, what's the worst case scenario situation. So that would be the blue line. If you see the blue squiggly line that's coming up around kind of midway between the road and the river, you can see it kind of waving up and down, and that's the 112.5. When we worked through the evaluation and we did an on-site survey of some elevations of what the water got to. And actually in 2019, our surveyor just down the road actually got an elevation of what the water got to. And it's about 111.9, 111.93 or something like that. So it didn't even get this high, but it certainly did get very high. And what we can expect with climate change is there's going to be more frequent or significant flooding. That's what they keep on identifying to us, which certainly poses a larger risk, but it's a little bit difficult for an analysis to be done, at least a small scale analysis. So we did do an evaluation modeling the river to try to get some predictability of water levels and what the water levels at the dam means to the water levels at the site. There's two things that make this very difficult is we don't have control over the dam. So we don't really know how to play out what the dam's going to do during certain situations. And the other part is the small scale effort to model a water course of this nature just didn't provide meaningful results. So those two things combined were unfortunately where we were hoping to take it in one direction, just didn't provide it to us. But what we do know is the flooding did get very significantly high. And although it didn't hit that 112.5 line that we see, that blue squiggly line, it did approach it very closely. So maybe you can move to the next slide. So what does that really mean to moving on to solutions? So why we wanted to model it is we wanted to gather in our heads, like, what if the dam gets to, say, because the dam's farther upstream, if it gets to 114, what does that mean to the site? If it gets to 115, what does that mean to site? Because then we could provide some predictability on here's what solutions you can implement if the water gets that high. Which, excuse me, sorry, which we were hoping to illustrate in our risk analysis. But because we weren't able to establish meaningful results there, we did do the risk analysis without it. But we do have meaningful results here that we were able to analyze. And we selected some very distinct criteria in order to perform this analysis on different options. And the meaning of these, I can go through a little bit, but the permanence is kind of the idea of if you install it or do it, how permanent is it? So for example, we gave a red score to a sandbag because, you know, you do it once, you have to remove it and then it's gone. It's not a permanent solution to address flooding. But something like raising a home is a permanent solution. You raise the home, you bring it out of the floodplain, and it's, you know, problem solved. So challenges of constructability, like for example, is it easy to install sandbag? Well, yeah, it's pretty easy in general to install a sandbag. It's time consuming and it's hard on the back, but it can be done. But other things like raising the home can't be done very easy. So we did an assessment with all these criteria: aesthetics, impact to permanent operations of, say, the house or the property, capital costs, effectiveness. Capital costs is pretty easy. Effectiveness, so how effective this will be to do flood mitigation. So raising a house is effective no matter what. But sandbag barrier is only effective if everybody does it across the board and does it to the height that's required. If one person doesn't, it becomes very ineffective. So maintenance, again, I think is pretty self-explanatory. Availability is a big one because some solutions are good, but not very accessible or available. And then risk, what's a risk to the landowner? What's a risk to the municipality for partnering or providing cost to this? So all these things came to, we did an analysis, based on all these things. And what we found, interestingly enough, is that floodproofing homes seems to be the best solution for everybody, and then followed by raised homes and sandbags. So those actually tie together pretty close. We did analyze a water gauge because it was requested to see how does a water gauge fit in, and it will provide some level of predictability that over time, as you start getting results and start seeing the impact of water levels, and you can project you can start to try to find the patterns and project. So water gauge, although not necessarily a mitigation option, it's a predictability option. So we did analyze it, and we did find it raised a pretty decent score. So Andrea, if you want to go on to the next page. So we did come up in the report with an action plan. Basically, typical action plans are immediate solutions. What can we do now to protect ourselves? What can we do now to provide some mitigation? And then short-term and long-term solutions. Short-term being in the near proof, like what's the best thing you can do, and long-term, those are like, for a lot of people, especially those who didn't get access to funding, might take a while to get to. So that's kind of more of a long-term solution. So the short term is to continue sandbagging. Each seasonal, if the seasonal waters are projecting to get high, I think we're going to have to advise people to, the best thing to do is sandbag and until other mitigation measures can be implemented. Short-term solution would be to flood-proof houses and cottages up until 112.5, or if you can't do 112.5, as high as you can do. And then the long term would just be to raise the house completely outside of that. I guess other reasons why other things just didn't work is probably mostly due to level of control and storage. So a barrier system is good to have, but during dry periods somebody's got to store that, and it has to be implemented across the board or it just fails. For example, the stop log systems, they use that on dams frequently, but in the end, like, to store all those logs and implement a stop log system that everybody's going to abide by and agree to, and to have the easements if the township takes it over, or to have guarantees that people implement it properly, or how are they going to do it if they're not near it because it's a cottage. So all these things are, really dragged the other solutions down, and made the solutions that we have the most prevalent. So Andrea, maybe you want to go ahead now?
Yeah. So as Stephen mentioned, due to the multi-jurisdictional nature of the Ottawa River, the upstream dams, and the large drainage area, it's very difficult to quantify the flow at the study area. There's limited flow or water depth information in the Westmeath Basin, and it is difficult to understand due to the changes in the river profile as well as the effect of the dams. So as a next step, it is recommended that floodplain mapping for the study area along the Ottawa River take place to accurately determine the floodplain elevation, which can assist with making decisions in the future. It's also recommended that a water gauge be installed in the Westmeath Basin to provide data for future flood forecasting and predictions. And I know that installing a water gauge has already been discussed with one resident who has been working with Councillor Neil Nicholson. JP2G has also prepared budget outlines for both these action items in order to apply for funding. And the final report will be posted on the township website. Any questions?
Thank you for that. Any questions? Councillor Nicholson.
Mayor, I don't know if we made a motion on this. Can we ask questions before the motion? I don't think we made a motion on this agenda item. Do we have to do that before we ask questions?
We didn't, because it wasn't written on the paper. So at this time, I'd like to ask for a first and a seconder to receive this report. Oh, there's a recommendation. Okay, it's number 1 and 2. Okay, so we'll read this. Recommendation of the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region 1 receive this Westmeath Provincial Park Flood Risk Assessment Final Report prepared by JP2G Consultants Inc. as a guiding document, and 2, direct staff to incorporate any action items into existing 2022 departmental work initiatives and report back as necessary. Motion and seconder, please. Councillor Nicholson and Reeve Regier, thank you. Now, Councillor Nicholson, you have a question.
Yeah, I I don't know what I was expecting when I saw that we were going to do this flood risk assessment study. But I guess what's come back very loud and clear is that it's an extremely complex and almost impossible way to mitigate the risk of an actual flood there. And I appreciate you doing the analysis, even just with the information that you did have. And especially for engaging the community. I think it was good for them to be included in this, and I noticed quite a few of the remarks were consistent as the same remarks I heard 3 years ago. So I'm glad to see that they got captured. The first one is just some odd ones, and I'm going to voice them even if I don't know if you can answer them. So the height of 112.5, I noticed that sometime in your report you talked about wave action, and that 112.5 included the potential effects of wave action. Is that, I couldn't find the study. You referenced the one near Pembroke, but not the one there wasn't one available for closer to this area. Did I miss it, or was it not available?
I can answer that. I think the only study we had available was the one further away. That's the only one that we've seen, because it seems like when they did the study, the analysis, they didn't do it all the way through, or at least not that we've been provided. So what we were provided was that study, and we did based off that. We do know that, like, I've done an analysis upstream of this and using that same study, and so it is the study that is accepted, but I don't think, or I haven't seen anything closer to our site that that we could use. So, and if there was something, we definitely would have included it. And
Good. I just wanted to make sure. I think the study that talked about Pembroke said that it allowed basically half a meter for wave action. So that would mean that, water, you said the water was reported at 111.99. So, and then we had an allowance for another half a meter. So as far as I'm concerned, I interpret that as the flood we had did reach the flood levels when wave action was included.
well, see, I agree, and I'm not sure on that, because we got a survey point, like our surveyor actually on the side, not at this job, during the flooding, went out and took a survey point. And he took it during that height of the flooding. And I would assume would have included the wave action. Like, I guess I don't know that for sure. I didn't discuss that with him. But in my mind, I was interpreting he did, and that's the height it got to, the max height it was getting to. So I guess I was thinking that height was the combined wave action and flood level. But that is something that maybe we can verify in the next few days, and then finalize this report, just clarifying that.
The reason this is important, and I know I'm splitting hairs here, but when we, if someone raises their house and spends the $30,000 to redo the foundation and elevate it to 112.5, and it's not high enough, we've not only wasted the $30,000, but we haven't mitigated anything. So to me, it's important to have the right height, especially if we're encouraging that kind of investment. And I know we're doing it now. It's the only reference point we have. But if we can, and maybe that's the next step, is that floodplain mapping, and to go is, for us to really encourage people to spend money on this, we've got to have it right.
And I agree with that completely. And that is why the next step is to establish better floodplain mapping, because I think if somebody was to use this report, I don't think it's honestly strong enough to change anything from that 112.5 that was done in 1986 or whatever the 80s was, because of that. And it doesn't really clarify completely what we could expect, especially with like climate change. But what I do know is it is because of the dams and because of the largeness of the area, it would be a substantially larger effort than what this project was to establish that floodplain mapping for something like the Ottawa River there.
Good. And sorry, and the next step, and this is more for staff, is what would be nice is us to get to a point where we have to accept that we have 105 buildings, I think it is what was mentioned in the report. 105 buildings all in a floodplain between varying degrees of 1 foot under to 7 or 8 feet below the floodplain. Like we have to set some parameters on what we're going to do with those existing structures. And if money is no object and someone wants to come in and rebuild, is that something that we can support? I would like to be able to give those homeowners some guidance as to what they do. They're in a flood zone. They own this property in a flood zone. How do we guide them, with maintenance and upgrades and all those things that are going to happen with any property that anybody owns? So I encourage, I accept that this is the first step in a very long process, and I thank you for doing what you could so far. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Councillor Jackson, please.
Rob, did you have something? Sorry.
I just wanted to speak to that a little bit in the floodplain mapping. So we got the funding for this work under the National Disaster Mitigation Program. So the funds are actually federal, but we applied through the province. And for us to apply for floodplain mapping, which we know we have to do and is dated, we had to start with the flood risk assessment. So what this report does is really highlight what people have gone through and puts that there. But for us to apply for the gauge or floodplain mapping, we had to do this step. And I think in terms of regulation on where if somebody wants to reconstruct and where that will be, some of that is zoning related. So we did pass post-flood, people were able to rebuild with their legal non-conforming to a certain height to flood proof. But down the road, that will be the driver, the control, and whether or not the chief building inspector can issue a permit because it's within the parameters under the planning. And I'm sure Ivan can clean up that language, but basically that's from a regulatory standpoint, that's where that hits in terms of that. I should point out that most of these properties are on private roads. So in terms of we don't have infrastructure here generally, we have the end of Sandpoint. So that's another consideration, that they can raise their homes, but there's also access related issues. So very complex issue, most of the houses have a wetland behind them and water in front of them, and they're technically in the floodway. So it's a very difficult thing, but I think we're hopeful there'll be new rounds of the National Disaster Mitigation Program available. Right now it's open federally, but Ontario has not opened it. But with this work and the quotes we've received from Andrea and Stephen, we'll be able to kind of move forward to the next step, which would be floodplain mapping and the gauge. We've tried to get others to put the gauge in and pay for it, and they've told us politely no. So in terms of next steps, that's what we would action.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson. Oh, sorry, Lane, you want to add to that?
I'll just going to add from the 1991 study about the wave action. It included the 0.44 meters included in the 112.5, just to clarify.
That's still the Pembroke study? Do you know?
That's correct. Yeah, it was a study for the Pembroke Township, I guess back then. Yeah, so it also included the Westmeath area.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
I guess I have a question with regards to the actual motion. So item number 2 says direct staff to incorporate any action items into existing 2022 departmental work plan initiatives and report back as necessary. This gives them a blank slate with no dollar values attached. So do we necessarily want to include that in the motion? Would you not want to bring a report back to say, okay, from this report, we recommend these items to be addressed, and we anticipate that the budget is going to be this, and we anticipate we're going to fund it by this. My concern is, I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that we're giving staff direction to go ahead and do stuff, and we have no idea what those costs are. So I would like to see that part I don't know,
If I can
like,
clarify, there's no item in the budget. So the only thing in the departmental work plan is the pre-planning, which is essentially getting this report and prepping for the next phases. So either the gauge or the floodplain mapping, if funding becomes available. So there's no budgeted, to be honest, and staff don't have the capacity to take anything more, but basically it's that that we're ready, should ever there be grant funding that becomes available, and then that would be the process. So it's not, so it's that we don't lose sight of this this report, but that we prepare for the next steps. And it's not in the 22 budget, but the departmental work plan is to make sure that we're not losing sight of these studies. They're not just sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Right.
And that for the 2023 budget, should there be money available, or if there's not, we bring it forward as a separate item and council decides how to fund it. So it's just that we don't lose sight of it. So if we can action anything in 2023, we don't lose sight of it. So it's kind of the standard recommendation we've been adding, that staff kind of keep it on the work chart, but any big capital project or project of that nature would require budget approval, because we don't have any budgeted approval beyond the scope of this flood risk assessment.
and I guess my concern is sometimes when it's presented to council, is that you council approved this work going forward, so we're already halfway through the work. We've already done a number of staff time to incorporate it, and some of the things that I see are more for individual, and I get that you're just looking at gauges and mapping, but some of the projects, I would hope, like construct temporary barriers, sandbags and pump water, like we're not doing that on private property.
No, and council approved a flood preparedness plan earlier that spoke to what our role is in terms of prepping for a flood, and it's making sure that we have some sandbags on hand.
Right.
And it speaks to kind of what we would do in the course of a flood and what we would do afterwards. So we would just take the stuff that we have a direct role in, and that would be, should we be able to access funding for the gauge or be able to access funding for floodplain mapping?
I guess my concern is as well that as a resident watching this council meeting and saying action items, and if these are, they're not really identified to say that these are not action items, these projects, we don't want to take responsibility for private property. They need to understand that what exactly our action items are, and I think they need to be listed here. So 1, the gauge, 2, the mapping, and that's it as far as that goes. And when, like you said, I think those words have to be in there as well, that it's not approval for 2023 budget at this time, that it is, it will come forward for discussion when there are grant funds available or other funds available. I think it's a great report and it's very well done. I just don't want to lie any responsibility on the township for private properties. And I don't want the residents to think that these are projects that we are going to implement in any way, shape, or form. We can notify them through this report, not even notify them if they ask. We can say, okay, we have this flood report. There are some recommendations. You need to decide what you need to do for your particular property. Because number one, we can't tell them what to do. We don't have the authority to do that. If they choose to flood out, then they choose to flood out. But we can't advise them in any way, shape, or form. We can say this is what was identified. You have to, as a homeowner and a property owner, you have to decide yourself how you're going to mitigate it moving forward, that it is not up to the township to do that. I just want to make that clear because I don't want anybody pointing the finger saying council said they were going to do this and now they're not doing it and now I'm flooded and you're responsible. So, you know, the almighty dollar goes to the municipality. So I want people to be clear on that because it's very important because as, you know, JP2G staff have said, that it's more than likely that it will happen on a continual basis. So hopefully not anytime soon. I don't want any staff member to go through flooding again, because it's a nightmare, as well as for residents, it's a nightmare. But I think it has to be clear what we're directing staff to do, those 2 items and only those 2 items.
If I can, Mr. Mayor, what I'd suggest based on that is just to amend number 2, if Councillors Nicholson and Reeve-Rigger are comfortable with that as a mover and seconder. Direct staff to include preparations for a future water gauge and floodplain mapping into the existing 2022 departmental work plan and report back as necessary and future budget approval.
Thank you.
Motioner and the seconder are in favor? Okay. Good to go on that then?
Can I ask another question? That's okay.
I believe so, yes. Go ahead, please, Councillor Nicholson.
So I don't know if it's Steve and Andrea or Rob, but it's quite clear that, you know, as Councillor Jackson said, there is nothing the township can do based on this flood risk assessment to mitigate risk in this area at this point in time. So can I just get an appreciation of the steps going forward? So say there was federal money for us to do the proper assessment. We had the gauge in place. What are the steps? Where are we trying to get to? How long does that take? And what are those steps?
So the one source of funding through you, Mr. Mayor, is the National Disaster Recovery Program. The province has to open it up, so that's the first step. So there's funding out there right now, but Ontario hasn't opened it up. So once you have the gauge is kind of like sandbags, just gives us some temporary protection, and the risk assessment provided by JP2G kind of speaks to that. The floodplain mapping would provide that extra layer of detail to what Stephen and Andrea were talking about in terms of where the line should be. And that would be the next step in looking at other alternatives, if any. But as we know, there's not much the township can do in this general area, and most of these properties, if not all of them, are grandfathered. But the floodplain mapping would provide that extra layer of certainty that would then cause other decision-making to happen. And maybe not by us, maybe by the provincial government, the Ontario Park, who owns the right next door Westmeath Provincial Park. It might provide landowners onus to do other measures. But the consultant team was aware of this going in and looked at solutions, but really reconfirmed what we can do. And at this point, the gauge is just going to give us better data, and the floodplain mapping will give us better data to make maybe some tougher calls down the road. But I'm not suggesting necessarily it's our calls. It might be other levels of government, but it might affect zoning and building permits down the road. But those are steps way into the future, and the floodplain mapping might confirm what we already know. We don't know that. But the way the NDMP works is you have to work through those steps to get the next level of funding. And then big scale mitigation measures that were also examined by the consultant team are also possible, but they only happen after you do floodplain mapping. So this could take a decade to really solve, which is unfortunate for the people that live there and for us in terms of flood preparedness, response, and recovery.
Perfect. But as you said, this is pretty much the only step forward that we can take to try to influence anything at the provincial or federal level. Good. Okay. And I'd be surprised if anything happens, but the blue line just moves further away from the shore. But I guess that's why you do the mapping. How much money? I heard mention that there was some detailed cost estimates. How much to do floodplain mapping for the area?
And not to put Angie on the spot, my recollection, and it's the guess we were making, is about $100,000. And a gauge is not just a little thing you put in the water. It's probably in the realm of 50 to 60, if not more. So those are just ballpark figures. And whether we're able to access the funding. So this was partial funding for this flood risk assessment. It's not 100% funding. So there is a component that would have to be municipally raised. I believe it was 75% for this study. So 100,000 for floodplain mapping as a baseline, and about 50 for a gauge or a gauge.
And how long to do that from the word go?
I think Andrea can speak to that, but I think we could do it in one season.
I think so. The floodplain mapping, we have to look into it a lot more, but I think that would be extensive modeling. that could take a while. The water gauge, we weren't really sure because there was existing infrastructure that they took out in 1995 that we reference in the report. So if that could be used, it could be maybe some rehab on that and implement a new water gauge. If it's a totally new system in the Westmeath Provincial Park area, it could be a longer process to kind of go through the provincial authorities. But I think, yeah, probably within one season, if it was next year.
Good. Well, thank you so much. I do appreciate the report, and the conversation around it is good. I mean, there are 105 residents that are having to deal with this, and it's not changing. It's just not this year, hopefully. All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your report, and it was quite a detailed report. I have it here for light reading later. And something not to look forward to, but as we move along and move forward, whether it be this council or the next council, that we definitely owe our taxpayers some movement here. So thank you for this report, and we can only go uphill from here.
Yep. All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye. Okay. Now, I do have one question on that, Rob. But can you answer this for me? It just popped in my mind. The last mapping survey that was done, do we know if that was done by province or feds, or did the township have to pay at that time?
Ivan, it was 1986, and it was a federal program with...
Yeah, so it's late 80s, early 90s, so 89 and 91 was the mapping with the years, I think. And then the project was done by the Environment Canada, so federal level, provincially with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and locally with the former township of Westmeath. So it was a 3-tier sort of project, and I'm uncertain of who paid the full cost of the project.
And that report then is still in play? It's still a legal document at this time?
That's correct. So we implement the results of that study or that assessment through the zoning bylaw. So the zoning bylaw is the zoning bylaw for the former township of Westmeath. So it's bylaw from 1998. So I will note that the zoning bylaw is currently in a process of review, and the current policies will just be re-implemented as they sit now until new mapping is provided. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Oh. Yeah, as amended, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Now we move on to 4.4, Council Remuneration. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region approve the proposed minor modification. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region approve the proposed minor modifications to the council remuneration for the next term of council 2022 to 2026. Motion is seconder, please. Councillor Jackson and Councillor McLaughlin, thank you. And this goes to Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what council saw last time was the results of the review for public consultation. So they've been out since that time. I should note, unfortunately, that the ad that we placed with the Eganville Leader did not run, although we did place it. But we did provide public notice of this public meeting through our township website and Facebook. So accordingly, what I'm recommending is we hold off on the bylaw to allow just 2 more weeks if anybody has any comments, and then the bylaw will come at the next meeting. Should point out that we have received no comments or concerns or requests to speak. So I won't go through the slides as we went through the same material at the last meeting, and I don't anticipate any concerns because we're really just making minor tweaks. But the bylaw, what we'll do is we'll wait for the bylaw at the next meeting and give people just a little extra time since the ad in the Eganville Leader did not run. If there are any questions, I'll take them.
Okay, any questions? Do we need to have a vote on this, or we just move on? We need.
Yeah, a vote on the motion, and the bylaw will come next time.
Okay, so all in favor? Carried, thank you. Now we move on to announcements. Item 5. Revigure, any announcements?
No, I have nothing at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
No, I have nothing at this time.
Councillor Jackson.
Nothing at this time.
Councillor Nicholson.
I know I should have looked it up because Councillor McLaughlin's going to correct me later, but there is a St. Patrick's Day function in Westmeath. I just can't remember if it's Friday night. Do you remember? No. So anybody that's listening that's interested in, it is coming up. I think it's Friday night, but don't believe me, check Facebook. And there are 2 seniors home support and active living activities coming up at the end of March. You'll see one in the Haley United Church Hall on March 25th, and a second one on March 29th at the Anglican Church Hall here in Cobden. Both require registration through our pilot, and more information can be found on our Facebook page. Thanks, Mayor.
Great, thank you. So when you find that, then you can put it on your Facebook you can share it. Okay. Okay, I have an announcement, please. The Township of Whitewater Region supports the important work of the Robbie Dean Centre to support youth and mental health. The following people have been nominated by others as a thank you for their good deeds to support their neighbours and the community. They will be contacted tomorrow and will be receiving 2 tickets to the One Good Reason concert with Sean McCann of the Great Big Sea Festival Hall. And the nominees are Beth and Peter Etche for their continued efforts in Westmeath, Bonnie Helferty for her ongoing efforts to support Cobden Main Street and the Food Bank, Rob McKenzie for helping out a Queensline farmer friend battling cancer during sowing season to get the crops in, Ted Richardson for spreading the joy of music and being part of the Music in the Park, Harold Gilchrist for supporting residents with snow removal and his donation of beef to a family with new twin babies, Joy and Shane Curry for their support of local food initiatives, including Taste of the Valley and Farmers Market. So congratulations to all who were nominated. And look forward to somebody seeing you in the future. Okay. Thank you, folks. Yes?
I have
Councillor
that detail
Nicholson?
if you don't mind if I pass it on now.
Councillor Nicholson, go ahead, please.
St. Patty's dinner is this Friday, March 18th. Dine-in or takeout is available from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Westmeath Hall. Adults are 10, children are 7. And you don't need to pre-order, but you can if you want. You just get a hold of wdra@nrtco.net.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a good time. So now we move on to reports. 2021 Statement of Council Remuneration. Recommendation of the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region received the 2021 Statement of Council Remuneration prepared by the Treasurer dated March 16, 2022. Motion and a seconder, please. Revergier and Councillor Jackson, thank you. And this goes to Sean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take up too much of your time. This is a report we do every year. I've laid out the breakdown of the honorarium in the attachment. For the year, the total remuneration was $171,154.32. And with that, I'll pass it back to the chair if there's any questions.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for Sean? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll call for a vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to 6.2, mandatory firefighter certification. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region receive this report for information purposes and direct the fire chief to prepare for the pending mandatory firefighter certification. Motion and a seconder, please. Councillor Jackson and Councillor McLaughlin, thank you. And this goes to Chief Jonathan, please.
You need to stop. You need a mic.
So the province is making an amendment to the Fire Protection Prevention Act to not only stipulate that training is mandatory, which already existed, but what level of training and certification is required. There was a bill that came out in 2017 looking to do the same thing. It was removed with a change of government, but this one looks like it's going to go forward. With our department being what's considered a full service department, we need to train to firefighter level 1 and 2, as well as hazmat operations level, and our officers to company officer level 1. We have 4 years to do that, which is definitely attainable, and then an additional 2 years for our technical certification for our rescue stations. So this can be accomplished in a couple of different ways, but with a department our size, the number of people we have, and the level of expertise that exists within already, we're going to pursue a learning contract for Firefighter Level 1, 2, as well as our company officer course. The Firefighter Level 1 learning contract starts the end of this month, and the company officer contract work begins in April. Both will be taught in-house. There is a $65 enrollment fee per student or per firefighter, but otherwise everything else is in-house costs. Much of this training would be taking place anyway. It's just going to be done in a slightly different fashion. The hazardous materials operations level, there's still some questions on how that's going to roll out throughout the province. It's something that hasn't been emphasized really strongly in the past. So the Fire Marshal's office and the remnants of the Fire College are working on ways to facilitate that. So just a little idea of what the timeframes would be, or the time commitment for each of these courses. Our Firefighter Level 1 course is approximately 150 hours, almost split half and half between theory and practical. With our learning contract with the Fire Marshal's office, the theory part will be taught online, so we won't have to provide any instructors, and students can work at their own pace. Then the remaining portion will be done practically in person with our own instructors. The Firefighter Level 2 course is about 80 hours, and it's also split fairly evenly, as well as the fire officer course. Each one of these courses does have that $65 enrollment fee, and that allows the Fire Marshal's office and the Fire College to track a lot of this, as well as administer the testing at the end. There's both a written test and a practical evaluation. They provide the instructors and the proctors for both of those events. We just have to provide a facility. The financial implications for this are not going to be staggering, I don't believe. The enrollment fee is the most obvious. There is going to be a little bit of extra training on things that we maybe didn't emphasize in the past, but it's not going to be overwhelming. Just for reference, just the Firefighter Level 1 course, if we were to send people out, is $1,200. It requires 9 days of in-person training plus an additional online portion. So that doesn't consider, the travel back and forth. Usually they try to do them on weekends, so people would be giving up 3 long weekends just to take these courses. With the Fire College being closed, there's nowhere that has free accommodations anymore or food, so there's those costs as well. I think the only way for us to really do this economically and meet the timeframes is to teach it in-house, and we definitely have the expertise to do it. Part of the learning contracts, the Fire Marshal's office requires us to send resumes in for each of the instructors to make sure that they meet their threshold, and we've already done that, and there's been no issue. Probably the biggest hurdle we're going to face with this is a little bit of administrative work. Well, actually, I should say it's a fair bit of administrative work, and then the fact that we still lack a facility to do some of this training at. I know it's come up in the past, but it remains a priority for the fire service. So that's about all I have, unless there's questions.
That's a lot to digest. But as you said, this has been going on since 2017, and here we are again. And now we've got another election coming up in June, so who's to say if this carries on again? It's very discouraging that they start something and they've shown us that they never finish. And this isn't the first time, so hopefully we can stay on top of it, and as long as we can do it in-house, it'll be much easier to attain volunteer firefighters. Does that mean that are we moving towards doing away with the volunteer?
In what regard?
Well, we'll be calling our fire departments now instead of volunteer fire departments, and a lot of the rules still call them volunteer fire departments, but...
Yeah, I think that verbiage is something that really needs to end, because There is really no difference between a volunteer fire department and a full-time fire department as far as the recommendations for service, as far as the level of training required. It's really just the remuneration factor. It's going to be part-time and full-time, I think, is probably a better or more accurate description.
Because as much as I can recollect, I think it's about 20 years since they come up with the 100-hour course and went on from there. And they still haven't settled it. Like, it's been 20 years. So it's just unfortunate, because how do you budget for it? Because you never know if it's going to continue. And then if you do continue, are they going to be respected for it? That was another problem at the end of it all. People did the training and then they wouldn't acknowledge it. So anyway, all we can do is move forward. Anyone have questions? Reeve Rigier, please.
Thanks. Just one, Jonathan. Is there anything that is repetitive throughout all municipalities? Like, I'm just thinking with the leg, or is there anything that we can do to maybe alleviate some of these costs if we combine forces?
There definitely is some room for working together. I think as a larger department, we might be the ones to take the lead. For these learning contracts that I'm talking about, there's a minimum number of students required that some of the smaller departments might not have, where we could bring them in. If our recruitment goes as it has in the past, probably 4 or 5 years, we're hiring somewhere between 10 and 15 firefighters per year to deal with attrition and retirements and things like that. So we would have room to take on a few of these members. And with doing that, they could bring some of their instructors in to help. And there's definitely room for some collaboration, and hopefully this brings some of that on.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But that brings up another question. I look at the CAO when I say this. If you do, in fact, bring in neighboring municipalities to take part in the training, what does that mean for our insurance policy?
So if it's if it's a contract with the outside person bringing in, it's just filling people in a classroom. We do it all the time with other areas. I should note on this, there's some fire chiefs that are kicking and screaming about it, while I think Jonathan and I are of the mind that this is kind of inevitable, and we want to keep our firefighters safe, and we want to ensure they have adequate training. And it is good that they're spending more time training than they are responding to bad things, but we want to make sure when they are that they're fully equipped to do so. So we will continue to look at that, but no, they would be participating, they would be trained following a standard curriculum, and I think that's what the purpose of this is, that there's some standardization that's been around, as you said, Mr. Mayor, for years, and this just formalizes it even more. But yes, through LEG and other municipalities, anybody that wants to collaborate, but filling the classroom would be cost efficient for everybody.
Does that mean then we're going to seek remuneration from somebody coming in, but as long as they paid their $32 or whatever?
Honestly, my take on it is, if it's a smaller number, 1 or 2 students, it really doesn't change our costs. They would pay their $65 to the province, but the rest is, whether we have 12 students or 14 students, it's more kind of in good faith. And it does help us in the long run. We'll know that they're trained to a level, they'll know we're trained to a level. It'll make integration easier on calls. We already have automatic aid agreements on top of mutual aid agreements, so everybody working on the same playbook is a benefit. So,
is there any thought being given to the county then coming up with a training facility, or is that dead in the water? I know it was up for negotiations or something at one point.
It's still pending at CNL, but it doesn't seem to be getting a lot of traction right now. I think dealing with a private enterprise has been a bit of a challenge. So right now there's nothing pending.
Okay, place to start. Anyone else? Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that, we demand a lot of our, I won't say volunteer now, I'll say part-time firefighters. And they support the community tremendous ways. I think offering programs like this training online keeps them closer to home. So they're losing less time away from their families, right? And then having to have someone come back in and do the things around, to help the family out when they're gone. So I think there's less impact. And I think the viewpoint, especially looking into the future, having our own training facility keeps them closer to home, right? Training's available, they can do it more often. it becomes a center of excellence for our guys. So I'm encouraged by this in that perspective. So I hope the chief continues, and I look forward to seeing it in future budgets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, call for vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. (6.3) 2021 Annual Drinking Water Reports. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region adopt the 2021 annual reports for the following drinking water systems. 1. Beachburg Drinking Water System. 2. Cobden Drinking Water System. And 3. Haley Drinking Water System. Motion and seconder, please. Reeve McLaughlin, or Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Nicholson, sorry. And this goes to Steve, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under OREG 170, our operating authority or the township has to prepare annual drinking water reports, and those reports have to be made public for whoever wants to see them, view them. So this report simply just puts forth that notion that we have to do it, and within I've also added a little performance summary of the drinking water systems as per the inspections, the annual inspection reports carried out by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. The performance ratings are amazing, excellent. And so following this report prepared for council, we will then place these drinking water reports on our website and made available to whoever wants to see them. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any questions? Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. The question, Mayor, if I can address Steve.
Please.
I know, and I have this COVID memory lapse. I can't remember which year it was that we had the discoloration here in Cobden's water. Was that this year?
It was this year, 2021.
2021. Okay, so it would have been in last year's report.
No, this
one.
is the 2021
Correct.
report.
Yeah, good. Yeah, putting it all together. So, just for the sake of the public and to put it on the open floor, can you describe what happened there and how, if it did show up in the report, how it did?
So this has happened before with discolored water. Manganese is naturally occurring in the lake, and under certain circumstances, i.e. temperature, water temperature primarily, you get elevated levels. So it turns your water kind of a brownish color. But to fight that, or it's an aesthetic issue. It's a naturally occurring element. It's perfectly safe. It's aesthetics. It doesn't look good. So to battle that, you use a chemical called potassium permanganate, which is very pink in color. And it's a balancing act for the operators to try to get just the right amount of potassium permanganate in there to fight the discoloration, and you can go over the top with it. And sometimes, based on the temperature of the water, potassium permanganate doesn't work as effectively as it usually does. So we turn the water pink. And that, in my time in Whitewater region, this would be, I think, the second time that's happened. So it's a balancing act for the operators to try to get just the right amount of that chemical in there. So the culprit is manganese.
Perfect. And it doesn't occur in the water source for the other two locations?
No, because this is surface water, and that's groundwater.
Yeah. Perfect. Good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Lane, go ahead.
So, and if I can just add, part of the 22 budget process, we do have a project, a study, to try to come back and see what we can do with Aqua leading that project, which is just about to be underway now, with a kickoff meeting happening shortly. So, and hopefully the outcome will provide some recommendations to Aqua and ourselves how to mitigate that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Now we've gone to 6.4, Change of landfill operations feasibility. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region approve the change of operations feasibility study prepared by JP2G Consultants, Inc. for the Ross landfill for MECP consideration and approval. Motion and a seconder, please. Reeve Regier and Councillor Nicholson, thank you. And this goes to Steve, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of operational changes forecasted, and one of them's already well underway with our new scales. We've engaged JP2G to submit this report to MECP for it has to go to the district manager. It's basically getting their approval to change what we're doing on site in terms of design and how we operate. So a few things that we're undertaking is we're going to be putting a new roadway in and a new entrance to get more vehicles off the road while they're waiting in queue for the scales. And also to put in a little area with some bins to segregate different types of waste. And the primary reason for that is to keep the public and contractors off the tipping face for safety reasons. There is merit in that. So the scales are already in. And in order to do this area for bins and to put a new road in, part and parcel, we'll have to change the shape of the waste mound, and you'll see that in the report. So there is a new design. So it has to go to the ministry for approval, essentially. Not mentioned in JP2G's report to the ministry, but there also is merit in potentially looking at a minor expansion to the landfill site as well. But that's going to be really, truly impacted by how the leachate plume migrating off-site, where it goes over the next several years. And so that's why we have so many boreholes around the site to monitor the leachate. And in good faith, we may want to budget maybe in the next year or two to install a couple more boreholes for testing, for monitoring. So that's what this is. This is just to get ministry's approval to redesign the shape of the waste mound, keeping in mind the same remaining capacity, the same volume, but just to show them that we're changing a few operational things.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Jackson, please.
Just a question, because we had asked it, or at least I had asked it. The scale is not being moved, correct?
No.
Okay, good. Because that was one of the things that, we had asked when it was being installed, that, whatever needed to be done in the future, that the scale was in the proper location for future needs. And I didn't think it was going to be moved, but I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Reeve Regier.
Thank you. Just a comment, and I guess it's something we have to take into consideration as we're thinking ahead into the future, is sustained technology and what could possibly be coming to McNabb Braeside with Mayor Peckett and his and all the work that he's putting there, because that could absolutely change the way every municipality does business with our landfills. Mm-hmm. So we can't rule that out. We've got to keep that, I think, in the back of our back of our mind as we're moving forward with this.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, Mayor, if I can ask Steve another question.
Yes, please.
I noticed in the report, that I understand the premise of the request for permission to change the layout. In the report, though, I got stuck on the forecasted lifespan of the landfill at 21 years, assuming no expansion. If we assume that 21 years is the max, at what point between now and then do we have to start making decisions for what we'll do in the 22nd year?
Tomorrow? As soon as possible.
Okay, so
I'll let Lane take that.
Yeah, and if I can add, the part of the project from JP2G that was awarded last year, there was 2 steps. One was the expansion feasibility study, and the second was the actual site plan. So this is the actual site plan part of it, which and JP2G is also working on the actual feasibility. And even in the feasibility is just 2 steps. In the report that Steve wrote, there's a level that we are approved at, but it actually falls short of the actual design capacity of it. So that's kind of step 1 to increase that one, at least to our design. And it appears that task is pretty reasonable. We can push that level. That would push off our years past 21 years. And the next step is to what feasibility study to actually expand, and what's the and I believe it's 40,000.
Yes, it's in that range.
Is we can expand at a time, and determine what requirements that the MECP would require. So it's that's kind of step 2, phase 2 of this project. So hopefully, so staff are working towards that, and hopefully very shortly we'll have our report back to council with Kevin Mutter from JP2G doing a presentation.
So, Councillor McLaughlin, aside from my short, silly answer, we're working towards, as Lane said, getting a grip on getting underway, how we can possibly get an expansion, if it's even possible. My experience has shown that it's going to be based solely on your monitoring program, so your groundwater and surface water monitoring, and that's really going to make the decision.
So the thing that I would love to appreciate more is that timeline and some indication of when those decision points are. Because my fear is that we'll be working on the expansion. If the expansion doesn't get approved, we can't go back in time and start on another option. So are we working on both options at the same time, or is it tightly synchronized? I would rather have that feeling of appreciation. We always have the fallback where we just buy into the LV solution, or the McNabb Braeside one, but I'd prefer to give our taxpayers options, and for that's going to take a little bit more work on our end. So I don't know, I asked the CAO or the mayor to consider if we could kind of get an appreciation for how that timeline works and those decisions that need to be made by when.
CAO, is there anything in the budgetary timeline for that?
No, I would just note that the next council, when it looks at its strat plan, will look at, it's a strategy, it's one thing, but we've done a few key things, this work, the scales, the items that Lane and Steve have talked about in terms of 2 phases of expansion, potential buy-in with the Ottawa Valley Waste Recovery Centre, plus general support for what McNabb is looking at. So we have more irons in the fire than we had 5 years ago, and that'll be the next phase with the strat plan and detailed strategies on moving that forward in the next kind of 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
I guess what I'd like to know is that over the years I've heard, and I could be mixing up municipalities, but over the years I've heard that we've had a short lifespan of the landfill. And short meaning under 30 years. Am I accurate in saying that? And we've done mitigating factors over the years. So it'd be nice to know that timeline. Like say back in 2001, we anticipated that there was going to be 25 years left. In 2005, we did this, and therefore it added so many years to the landfill. 2010, all of a sudden we've got 10 years left, and like whatever that time frame is, it would be nice so that council can understand that this isn't my understanding, and I could be wrong, this isn't the first time that we've had a shorter lifespan to the landfill. Am I correct in saying that, or am I losing my mind? Because I could be losing my mind.
No, based on my time here, we've looked at the potential capacity. And each year, we take the volume that we've put in and we subtract it. Some would consider under 30 years short, some would consider it long, depends on who you ask. But you have to keep in mind that this theoretical capacity is simply based on an annual topographic survey. And we can't forecast how many cubic meters of each year we're going to put in place. We don't know. We've been averaging typically 8,000 to 9,000. Last year we put in over 10,000. I remember one year we put in almost 13,000 cubic meters. So every year is different. It's just a theoretical capacity.
Also made certain changes in the overall landfill.
We've changed the design of it and the
over
waste
time,
mound. Yes.
and how we've
Yes.
managed the mound and
Correct.
so on. And therefore, it has increased the capacity and increased
the same
lifespan.
capacity was always
Sorry,
there.
the lifespan of the, I should say.
It was always the same theoretical capacity.
Yes.
It's just where we were first we were in a trench, now we're building a mound. We had phase 1, which is a trench, then we moved into phase 2. It's never really changed.
So
I can recall.
You're saying that we've consistently lost years, we never gained years by making any changes. No. But if we expanded and got permission to expand and make some of these changes as well as expand, it could increase the life cycle of the waste recovery.
It could, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And also there's changes that we're doing currently right now. For example, we're stockpiling mattresses and couches, because if you could imagine size of a mattress, for example. I think Steve told me last year we had 400 mattresses. Can you imagine we piled up 400 mattresses at 1 foot thick? How high it would be? So we're looking at that. There's two options. We can pay to have them shipped off. Or we can have them grind during our grinding tender. So that's one thing we're doing as staff to try to prolong the life. Another one part of the exercise too, looking at even for cover. Basically, right now we have two different types of cover material. We have sand that we're using for cover material, and also our grindings that we use. And that's why for grinding for C&D waste, why it's important, why it's there's two different rates for it. One is if it's clean C&D that we can use for grinding, we can use it for cover. It's not just actually going as waste. If it's a mixed load comes in, we have to wait. We have to put it in our waste pile, and then we have to cover it. So you can imagine that's why there's a cost savings for that. And then the third option that we're looking at is a tarp system. So in the summer months, not during winter months, but we can, instead of putting sand on and covering, we can tarp the active area and then remove it the next morning. And even last year, one thing we did for a few months as a test pilot is with millers on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and I guess Monday, Tuesday for the curbside collection. It's holding it. So when the curbside comes on Monday, they're the only ones in there. But we have to cover the waste. So if we can hold that Monday and come Tuesday, and come with a Tuesday, we can provide less cover during the week. So we're looking at that again with sometime when summer comes along, is asking millers to do that again, and hopefully in all this programs that hopefully will extend the life of the landfill. And just to add to, if you don't mind, to Reeve Rieger's question, but the McNabb Braeside. So we're actually working with all the partners in surrounding area, which was part of the leg discussion. So we're actually it was brought on by Adams and Bromley when Ms. Vraken was there, but since she's left, myself and actually Steve going to be championing and hosting chairing the meetings, and one of the items is actually that technology from. So hopefully, when it proceeds more on, we'll be involved at a staff level. Thank you.
Anything else? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Thank you, Lane and Steve. Now we move on to item 6.5, site plan control approval, 240 Pinewood Park Road. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region 1 approve the entering into a site plan agreement with 274259 Ontario Limited to permit the redevelopment of 240 Pinewood Park, subject to the final approval by the CAO. And 2, approve the removal of the holding symbol from those lands located within the campground commercial exception 4 holding bracket CC E4H zone. Motion and a seconder, please. Councillor McLaughlin and Reeve-Regier, thank you. And this goes to Ivan, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. So there's two components to this report. So one pertains to the removal of the holding symbol. So council may recall back in 2019 in July, we passed a zoning bylaw amendment for the property located at 240 Pinewood Park. So that's the property at the Pinewood Park Campground. So they had proposed to add an additional 10 campground sites, primarily for family purposes. And we had, council had adopted a bylaw to permit those uses subject to the submission of certain reports and studies. So that was the reasoning for the holding symbol. So since July 2019, the property owner has filed the necessary reports, being the environmental impact study, the stage 1 archaeological assessment, and they've applied to the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks for servicing. And they've obtained their approval just in February of this year, February 17th. So they received their ECA for these 10 additional sites. So essentially, they've met all the requirements or fulfilled all of the requirements for the holding symbol, so staff are supportive for the removal of the holding symbol. And that leads us to the second item, which is the site plan agreement. So when we look at development of commercial properties of this nature, there is a need to obtain site plan control approval. So ultimately, there will be an agreement that is attached to the bylaw at the end of the council agenda package. And that site plan agreement pertains to the development of these 10 sites to conform to the approvals provided by the ministry and their studies. So essentially, staff are supportive of these two actions. It'll ultimately provide for additional campground sites that'll preserve the rural character and landscape. The property will be serviced by long-term on-site private services as demonstrated with the ministry's approval. And there should be no impacts to the natural heritage features. So staff are supportive and looking for council's consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Now, 6.6, development agreement. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region approve the execution of a development agreement with Andrea Burde to implement the Phase 1 karst assessment. Motion and a seconder, please. Councillor Nicholson and Councillor McLaughlin, thank you. And this goes to Ivan, please.
Yeah, thanks again. So the property in question here are 3 proposed severed parcels described as part of Lot 20, Westmeath Concession 6, East Muskrat Lake. They front on Westmeath Road. So the owner filed for 3 severance applications, noted as the file numbers in the report here. So these files were considered by council back in May 2021. So that was just before we received delegated authority. So they're currently being processed by the County of Renfrew. One of the requirements or conditions was that the proponent complete a karst assessment, and they've done just that report. So the Phase 1. And one of the recommendations indicated that during excavation for construction, that if they encounter bedrock, that further investigation occur. So the primary purpose of the agreement here is to inform future purchasers of the study and the recommendations. So this is a pretty generic report pertaining to a development agreement, which is a condition of severance. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Nicholson.
Just a clarification, Mayor. The two diagrams provided in the attachment, one indicates a space between the first two lots and the third lot, and the other one doesn't. Can we just clarify which is correct?
I believe there's no spacing between the three lots. So the first diagram would be incorrect and the second one would be correct. Certainly the lot sizes are not going to have been approved pursuant to what's noted here, and the surveying will ultimately dictate if there's a spacing, but I don't anticipate there's a spacing between the lots. Thanks.
Okay, so possibly a computer glitch on the program. Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Item 6.7, Tourist Booth and Taste of the Valley. Recommendation of the council direct staff to prepare for the opening of the tourist booth located at Veterans Memorial Park for the months of June, July, and August 2022, as well as organize the Taste of the Valley on Saturday, October 15th, 2022 at the Cobden Arena/Fairgrounds. Motion and seconder, please. Reeve Rigier and Councillor McLaughlin. Thank you. And this goes to Ivan again.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just want to recognize just Debbie Reddy, our department coordinator, had drafted this report, and I'm presenting it here tonight. So we're progressing into the summer. Essentially, the tourist booth, we're seeking to get council's support in moving forward with its opening come June 1st. So in 2020, due to COVID, the tourist booth did not open. However, last summer through the months of July and August, it was open and it was serviced by volunteers. So last year and moving forward, the Community Development Coordinator, Debbie Reddy, will continue to oversee the coordination of the tourist booth. So she'll contact volunteers, ensure that there's a schedule put out and that it's open throughout the week. So at this time and for last year, the booth was open through the weekdays, and unfortunately it was not open on weekends. We'll certainly communicate with the volunteers and see if there's any interest in working on the weekends, but for the time being, we're just seeking to open for the months of June, July, and August of this year, and as volunteers permit, we will keep the booth open as much as we can. The second item here is the Taste of the Valley. So again, over the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021, the actual in-person Taste of the Valley was canceled. I know the County of Renfrew did an online sort of portal where they recognize some of the vendors for the Taste of the Valley. They are planning on moving forward with a live Taste of the Valley. As council will be aware, the Cobden is the last event of the Taste of the Valley, and it is held the weekend after Thanksgiving. It is the largest Taste of the Valley event in Renfrew County. The date that is being suggested, again, the same date, the weekend after the Thanksgiving, would be October 15th, 2022, and it would be held at the Cobden Arena and Fairgrounds. So staff, again, supportive of moving forward with this initiative, subject to any changes with respect to the pandemic. So just looking for council's consideration on this. As it relates to the financial implications, so we did have an operational budget for the tourist booth, so any of these assistance they need there, we've certainly budgeted that as part of the budget process. And for the Taste of the Valley, that was also budgeted as part of the budget deliberations. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Reeve Rigier, please.
Not a question, just a comment. It's just great to see the park going again. I know it was last summer, and it'll be great to see it go full bore this season again. And the Taste of the Valley, it's just so good to have that back again. It after the last 2 years, I think it was such a great event, and I think moving forward, it'll just continue to grow. And I do again appreciate staff, because I know it is a commitment on their part too. For that weekend, but anyway, it's good to see it moving forward again, for sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Jackson?
Does the County of Renfrew still have any involvement with the Taste of the Valley, or are they all separate events?
So they have the branding component, so they've created this Taste of the Valley. However, the local township deals with the operational component of it. So what the county does, they do receive payment or applications from vendors and receive payment, or they make payment here. But as it relates to the operations of the event, it's held primarily by the townships.
So for the cost factor to the township, is there any recoup of the vendor
So,
revenue
yeah,
to
so.
the township?
Yeah, my apologies, I don't mean to cut you off. So in past years, it was essentially a cost neutral thing outside of potentially staff time. So the cost to rent fencing or whatever type of equipment, we would be able to recover that cost through the vendor fees. But that's not accounting for staff time. Typically, it was $5,000 that came in from vendors and then about $5,000 that went out.
And we do, it's not volunteered staff time, it's staff are paid overtime or banked, they bank their time, correct?
Yeah, I mean, generally, we try to ensure the management of the operations during our regular hours of work and then for the event.
Actual day, yeah.
And there's volunteers that participate as well that assist us.
Perfect. I just want to make note that Ali Hennessy has taken over the music in the park from her grandfather, Ted Barron, who passed. So I'm very happy to see some of the posts that she's posted. So if anybody's interested in doing music in the park, it'll be Wednesday evenings and Sunday afternoons, and they're to contact Ali Hennessy. Thank you, Ali.
I'm hoping Debbie knows that, because maybe we can help with advertising, et cetera. So,
Yeah, we'll have Debbie connect with Ali for sure. Thanks.
Thanks.
Councilor McLaughlin, I believe you had your hand up.
I did. I'm just wondering about the flower beds around the tourist booth. Do we take care of them, or who looks after that?
We certainly do deal with the flower beds, and my understanding it's through the Parks and Recreation Department. So they'll purchase flowers and put them in.
Okay. Yeah, I know at one time it used to be Beverly Cobb who used to do it. And it always was so nice, and I wasn't sure what's happened, so.
We certainly, when there's no flowers there, Beverly does contact us.
I'm sure she would.
And then we put flowers in the pots.
Yeah. So you're saying she still keeps an eye on things?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Moving on to 6.8, streetlight conversion. Recommendation of the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region award tender 2022-03 LED street lighting conversion to Rondo Electric 1997 Limited at a cost of $64,878.29, inclusive of non-refundable HST. Motion and seconder, please. Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Jackson, thank you. And this goes to Lane, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So the report is for the award of the tender. The tender, we had eight bids, ranging from $52,000 to $87,000. With the staff, analyzed the bids for math errors and the required submission requirements. We found that the lowest bid did not meet the requirements, as they didn't provide some of the required documents, and staff are recommending to go with the second lowest bidder, which is Rondo Electric. They provided a schedule from March 8th to April 1st to award the tender and to provide a kickoff meeting with the actual start of the conversion starting April 4th and completing the fixtures by May 6th. Some of the notable projects that it was within vary. Sorry. Yeah. So some of the notable projects that they're the 10-year warranty on the luminaires with a 1-year requirement from the installer. 3,000 K temperature versus the 4,000 K temperature that we're currently have right now that are LEDs. That they're dark sky friendly, and then also we're removing the existing relay system. With the capital budget, it falls short of the 25 $250,000 budget. With the contingency, which would bring it up to $168,000. With the contingency providing costs for Hydro One fees to install the proposed plugs that were on poles. And part of the tender provided options for it was provisional items. One was a plug for decorative of streetlights. Another option was for new locations, and the other ones were so if they didn't provide a defect in the current wiring or fuse kit. With the cost savings that we're moving forward, currently the township is invoiced over 22,000 kilowatt hours per month, and after the conversion, it'll be down to just shy of 6,000, which would be a cost saving of $3,500 a month. Sorry, and this would be a debenture over 10 years, with the annual debenture is $30,000. The next steps will be provided to bring back to council a streetscaping kit of parts showing the decorative street lighting on Main Street with proposed garbage and recycling bins, and also showing the approved bench that Ivan has provided around the township. And that'll be the next steps part of this project. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Do you have an anticipated payback time?
I
So
do,
what the
yeah.
savings are going to be from the electricity, overall the cost of the actual project?
Yeah, sorry, I had this, sorry.
I would just note that whatever that calculation will be, won't, like, the debenture will have an effect on that, and I don't really have a finalized number on that, so just be a guesstimation at this point.
Yeah, and I had on the actual
Cost of borrowing.
Yeah, sorry, the current.
Right, but overall, the cost for the project, and then you can factor in a 3% or whatever, but a simple payback. I know in LV, its simple payback was 5 years, and it took 5 years, and now we're saving money every year from then on out, so it's been really good.
Yeah, with the current savings of $3,500 per month, just for the ones that included for this project, not included the decorative lighting and the Beachburg and the POS have already been switched. It's about a 4.5 year to 5 year project payback, but what staff are providing a 10-year debenture for this.
Yeah, like the debenture piece is just, again, very, very loose and ballpark at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
And just wondering, we're doing all this work, has there been any thought into putting plugs in the posts in Forster's Falls and Westmeath, like we have in Cobden and Beachburg?
Yep. So the tender had a provisional item for it to install plugs. I think it was 30 of them in part of the tender, but which it is a unit price contract, so we can look at selling 10 or more or 30. But the price that you see in Rondo's bid included 30 plugs for decorative, which theirs would be the POS, Westmeath, and Forster Falls, and we can do more. We can do it in Haley Station. The one thing we're looking at is, and we're working with Hydro One to how it would be, because there's all different levels of Hydro One management, and there is a cost rate per how they charge for seasonal lighting. They have it, which is a different how it's billed, because it is all unmetered lighting, which you see in the report how we were billed for the streetlights, but which would be different for the seasonal, because it would only be for 2 months at a time, for example, so we would be billed accordingly. But we are working to see if we can, which I'm pretty sure we are, but it's just working with Hydro One on that.
Great, that answers my question. I really appreciate that. Thank
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none? All in favor? Carried, thank you. Planning Services Report. Recommendation that the Council of Township of Whitewater Region receive this report for informational purposes as it relates to the provision of temporary land use planning services for Whitewater Region. Motion and a seconder, please. Councillor Jackson and Councillor Nicholson, thank you. And this goes back to Ivan.
Yeah, thanks so much. So as council may be aware, I will be taking a leave of approximately 8 weeks, commencing at the end of March. So the CAO and I have reviewed different options to ensure that continued planning services occur, as well as the management services provided by my position. Essentially, we've determined that through the County of Renfrew, it's viewed as the best and most feasible option to meet statutory timelines and requirements. So they would receive an application, deem it complete, and then send the statutory notices in accordance with the Planning Act. And then ultimately, if I'm not back before the report comes to council, then we would engage private services through a consulting firm to prepare a recommending report to council. So essentially, to meet the statutory timeline requirements, it'd be through the County of Renfrew. So they have a manager of planning who's a registered professional planner in the province of Ontario, and also other planners, including Ann McVeigh, that served the township well prior to my arrival. Further to that, if there's any critical planning support needed, we have sought out some external consulting services. So there's a cost per hour for that. But certainly there's some capacity there if there's a need to reach out to them. And we've also reached out to some neighboring municipalities, including Greater Madawaska and Renfrew. And again, in critical situations, we could reach out to them at a sort of cost neutral type of service. One last item to speak of. So the CAO will provide management support to the planning and building services during my absence. And then the manager of Parks and Recreation will manage services related to economic development, corporate communications. So Jordan will oversee the tourist booth as well as the corporate communications, the website, social media, and the monthly newsletter, The Current. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Ivan. You can go. You're allowed to go. Councillor McLaughlin, please.
I'm just wondering, before we move ahead, could we take a 5-minute break?
Sure. Go ahead. We'll take 5. And we're back. Thank you. Now we move on to item 610, recommendation of the Council of the Township of Whitewater Region. 1, approve a delayed opening of the municipal office to the public at 11 a.m. on March 31st and June 23rd and November 24, 2022 for the purpose of all staff meetings And 2, authorize moving the June 14th, 2022 scheduled meeting to June 21st, 2022 to accommodate the AMCTO conference being attended by the CAO and clerk. Motion and seconder, please. Reeve and Councillor Jackson, thank you. This goes to Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the one good thing we had before the pandemic was an all-day staff meeting. And it was an opportunity to do some team building, but also for us to do some internal training on our code of conduct, also on ongoing initiatives, but also and skill building, but also health and safety. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, that hasn't occurred for 2 years, and we have some team building to do. As we know, the pandemic has been divisive out there, but also in here, and we'd like to bring the staff team together. Instead of one day, what we'd like to do is have smaller sessions throughout the year where we can share some information on what's going on, especially with a new council coming in. And then also we can bring in timely updates to staff from each department, but also different health and safety training. So the same amount of time, but just without closing the office for an entire day. So that is why the proposal is for that. So we would start at 7:30 and be done at 10:30 to be able to resume operations no later than 11. And then when we did the council calendar, we kept the June 14th date as is, but per the procedural bylaw, we move 1 week with AMCTO. Carmen and I are attending, and there's some really good sessions on records management, the elections, leading, managing, and I'll be presenting 2 sessions as well. And there are 5 Wednesdays in June, and we take a break in July, so moving it back 1 week is really good, actually, from a planning perspective and zoning meetings. So we just want to make sure we have council support to move forward from 1 day to 2 3-hour sessions instead. And we're already planning some of the content to get back to staff on the code of conduct and health and safety reminders and other skill building. Any questions? I'd like to take them.
Reeve
Thank you. Just a housekeeping. I think June 14th and June 21st are Tuesdays. So I'm thinking it should be June 15th and June 22nd. It's just, yeah, the dates are wrong there.
Okay, thank you.
I was looking at last year's calendar.
Last year's calendar.
No, I don't know. My fault. Thanks for noticing, yeah, because we won't be here on the Tuesday.
I never looked, I never noticed. Anyone else? Seeing nothing, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Now we move on to item 7, notice of motion. Anyone have notice of motion? Councillor McLaughlin?
Just, we were talking about the landfill tonight and the scales have been put in. I wonder if there, at some time, could be a report brought back on the financial impact of it, where we're sitting, whether it's the same as last year or it's higher or lower. And I think I had also asked to have discussion on the removal of the ashes, and I've never heard anything on that.
Yeah, if I can speak, yeah. So with the ashes, we're creating a waste management bylaw, but maybe we'll bring a scales report of what changes and what and how it compares cost-wise, and then we also can at the same time bring the timeline for capacity as as Councillor Jackson stated. We can do all 3 of them into one and bring it to the next council meeting, if that works.
That would be great with me.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll move on. Adoption of minutes, 8.1. Recommendation that the Township of Whitewater Region approve the regular minutes of March 2nd, 2022. Motion and a seconder. Councillor Jackson and Reeve, thank you. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Correspondence. There was a detailed design study for resurfacing Highway 17. This affects the top end of our township where we have no residents. It's just Highway 17, I believe, through that area. And the 9.2 was a new one for me. I've never heard of this before, but apparently I guess in some areas it's becoming a problem. Floating accommodation. So if anybody knows anything on that, please let the CAO know. Proposal for near surface disposal, 9.3. basically whatever the county is doing, that's what we'll do. And then we move on to bylaws. Oh, sorry, yes. Councillor Nicholson, please.
Just a question, Mayor, on 9.2. It talks about waterways over public lands, and in layman's terms, does that include the Ottawa River?
Most inland lakes are, the beds are owned by the province or they're owned by any kind of public entity. I'm not sure about canals, but yeah, so it'd be basically on water bodies. So our weather is not conducive to houseboats, permanent houseboats. I think this is a houseboat consultation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to, item 10, bylaws. We're approving all them bylaws?
Except minus that one, which will come to the next one.
Okay, so we're redoing bylaws, approving bylaws number 2022-03, 1486 through 1490. Recommendation be resolved that the bylaws listed on the March 16th, 2020 agenda be taken as read and passed. As amended. Motion is seconder, please. Councillor Jackson and Councillor Nicholson, thank you. All in favor? Question, Councillor McLaughlin?
So when you say, and I'm sorry, don't think I got the conversation, but you're taking out 22-3-1485 council
Yes.
remuneration?
Yes.
Okay.
That's coming back next meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
I missed that.
Okay, so all in favor? Carried, thank you. No closed session and adjournment, 16:49. Thank you all very much.